Jay Leno's story has often been told through laughter, timing, and an easy grin that made difficulty feel distant. Behind that familiar image, however, lived a man who learned early how to protect pain with humor. This summary reflects a quieter chapter of his life, where jokes no longer felt strong enough to carry everything he was facing. It is a story about endurance shaped by loss, devotion, aging, and love. Instead of spotlight moments and applause, it centers on private choices, long nights, and the slow realization that some roles matter more than fame. What follows is a human portrait of transition, written not as spectacle, but as reflection. The armor of humor for most of his life, Jay Leno relied on comedy as both career and shield. Humor was how he connected with audiences, but it was also how he distanced himself from pain. Every challenge became a setup for a joke. Every injury, something to laugh off before moving forward. This coping style worked for decades, allowing him to maintain an image of resilience and control. People saw him as unbreakable, always ready with a punchline. What they did not see was how that constant performance slowly limited his ability to acknowledge vulnerability. Over time, humor stopped being just expression and became protection. This section captures how laughter, once a gift, eventually became a barrier. It set the stage for why his later silence felt so striking. When he finally spoke without jokes, the absence of humor carried more weight than any routine ever could. The moment his voice changed. When Jay Leno eventually addressed the public without deflection, his tone surprised many. Gone was the energetic delivery and self-deprecating wit. In its place was a steady, calm voice that suggested acceptance rather than performance. This moment marked a shift from entertainer to individual. He was no longer trying to reassure everyone else that he was fine. Instead, he was acknowledging that he could not carry everything alone. This change did not come from weakness, but from honesty. It reflected a man who had reached the limits of endurance and realized that silence could sometimes speak more clearly than laughter. The emotional weight of this moment resonated because it contrasted so sharply with the persona audiences had known for years. It felt like listening to someone finally exhale after holding their breath for a lifetime. Surviving physical trauma. Jay's body endured a series of serious injuries that would have stopped most people. Fires, crashes, and repeated surgeries tested not only his physical strength, but his sense of invincibility. Each time, he returned quickly to work, minimizing the damage with humor and determination. Yet the accumulation of trauma left lasting effects. Recovery became slower. Pain lingered longer. The body that once kept pace with endless touring and long workdays began to resist. This section reflects how physical survival does not always mean true healing. Even when the visible wounds fade, the internal cost remains. Jay's insistence on pushing forward revealed both courage and denial. Eventually, his injuries forced him to confront the reality that resilience has limits, and ignoring them only deepens the toll. The cost of never stopping motion had always defined Jay Leno's life. From stages to studios to garages, movement was purpose. Standing still felt unnatural and frightening. After his injuries, however, rest was no longer optional. Fatigue, balance issues, and reduced endurance made constant activity impossible. This change challenged his identity at its core. Work was not just a job, it was how he measured worth and relevance. Slowing down felt like surrender, even when it was necessary. This section explores how aging and injury can feel like betrayal, especially for someone whose life depended on momentum. Jay's struggle was not only physical, but emotional. Learning to accept stillness required redefining strength, not as constant motion, but as intentional choice. Losing a professional home. The gradual sidelining of his automotive show represented more than a scheduling change. It symbolized the closing of a long chapter with a network that had shaped his career for decades. The show was an extension of his passions and identity, blending curiosity, craftsmanship, and storytelling. When it was pushed aside, the loss felt personal. This moment compounded his sense of displacement, arriving while he was already vulnerable from injury. It was not framed as rejection, yet it carried the weight of finality. This section highlights how professional shifts can feel like emotional losses, especially when they coincide with personal upheaval. For Jay, it reinforced the feeling that the world he built was quietly moving on without him. The private battle at home. While the public focused on his injuries and career changes, Jay was facing a far more painful reality at home. His wife Mavis was slowly slipping into dementia. The progression was subtle at first, marked by small lapses and repeated stories. Over time, it deepened into daily heartbreak. Each morning brought the same grief, relived as if new. Jay was forced to choose compassion over correction, comfort over clarity. This section humanizes caregiving as an act of repeated emotional endurance. Watching someone you love fade while still physically present is a unique kind of loss. It demands patience, gentleness, and strength that no spotlight can prepare you for. Becoming a full-time caregiver. As Mavis's condition worsened, Jay's role shifted from partner to protector. He became responsible for nearly every aspect of her daily life, from basic needs to physical support. This transition required humility and sacrifice. Independence, once prized, gave way to dependence built on trust. Filing for conservatorship was not about control, but care. It formalized his responsibility to safeguard her well-being. This section emphasizes the quiet bravery of caregiving, especially when roles reverse after decades together. Jay's commitment reflected deep love, expressed not through grand gestures, but through consistency. It showed that devotion is often measured in ordinary moments repeated endlessly. Facing his own limitations. Alongside caregiving, Jay had to confront changes in his own health. Medical complications affected his strength and balance, limiting activities that once defined him. Acknowledging these limits was painful. It meant accepting that some parts of his life were no longer sustainable. This section explores how aging forces reflection, especially for someone accustomed to control. The realization that energy is finite can feel like loss, but it can also bring clarity. Jay began to understand that protecting his remaining strength was not defeat. It was preparation for what mattered most. This acceptance marked a turning point from resistance to intention. Stepping away from the spotlight. Jay's decision to step back from public life was deliberate and quiet. There was no farewell tour or dramatic announcement. Instead, he chose privacy and focus. Caring for Mavis and preserving his health became priorities over visibility. This section reflects the courage required to leave applause behind voluntarily. In a culture that equates relevance with presence, stepping away can feel risky. Yet Jay's choice reframed success as alignment rather than recognition. He demonstrated that legacy does not require constant attention. Sometimes it is shaped by absence, by choosing where your energy truly belongs. Redefining legacy through giving. One of the most surprising choices Jay made involved his prized car collection. Rather than preserving it solely as a personal monument, he decided to share it with future generations. Donating vehicles to support young mechanics and engineers transformed passion into opportunity. This section highlights how letting go can be an act of generosity. The cars that once fueled his identity would now help others build theirs. It was a symbolic shift from accumulation to contribution. Jay reframed legacy not as ownership, but as impact. In doing so, he honored the joy those machines brought him by allowing them to inspire new paths forward. Telling the truth without performance. Jay's final creative projects were not about celebration, but honesty. A documentary and memoir drawn from private journals aimed to tell his story without embellishment. These works focused on love, loss, and resilience, rather than achievements. This section underscores the power of vulnerability when shared with intention. By choosing truth over image, Jay offered something deeper than entertainment. He allowed others to see the man behind the jokes, navigating aging, devotion, and acceptance. His story became less about fame and more about humanity. In stepping away from the spotlight, he revealed what truly remained when the laughter faded.